get it. It's annoying, but it's not going to crush our economy. And it's not just cash. They have piles of equity. 10 years ago, there was $8 trillion in household equity in the American housing market. Today, it's $30 trillion. Over 3 times what it was just a decade ago. And it's not just we have piles of equity, we have low debt-to-equity ratios, and if you actually look at the financial obligations, the cost of carrying a mortgage debt right now, it's at 4% of disposable personal income. That is the lowest it's ever been. Contrast that to where we were before the Great Recession, when it was the highest it had ever been. All right? This is a housing market that is bulletproof, and an increase in interest rates is not going to offset it. And behind all this cash and equity, there is debt. In the last few years, Americans have not used a lot of consumer debt for obvious reasons. They have piles of cash, but now they're starting to utilize it. HELOC debt is starting to expand. Credit card debt is starting to expand. Yet again, somebody out there trying to explain to us just how scary and tragic this is. It's not. Of course they're starting to borrow against all this wealth. And indeed, if you look at overall share of debt that's 90-day delinquent, they're still low. HELOCs, non-existent. Autos, back to normal levels of the last decade. Credit cards are just starting to get back to where they were in 17 and 18 and are way below where they were in 12 and 13. No, there's not a problem out there. There's plenty of momentum for consumers. Now, could this turn into a problem? Of course. That's why you invite me back every single year to do this talk. But not yet. It's not a problem right now. Now, yet again, this isn't the story, right? Oh, my God, no one will ever be able to buy a house. It's tragic. It's terrible. This is not one of those memes on the internet where this guy explains, he walks you through it, boomer. Let me explain how this works. Yeah, back in the 1980s, $80,000 for a house, $16,000 for a down payment. Salaries were $30,000, only half your annual pay. Now, boomer, look what I have to deal with. $400,000, down payment $80,000, salary of $50,000, 1.5 years. Don't you get it? Well, there's a few problems here. First of all, your numbers are completely wrong. Home prices aren't that expensive. Incomes are much higher. And by the way, back then it's the other way around. But I get it. A little fudging improves the overall, flow of the conversation, as the case may be. We're all maybe a little guilty of that when we're on stage. But this isn't even the whole of it. There's some gray folks out here. I see some gray over here. What else was going on in the 1980s that wasn't going on right now? Oh, yeah, double-digit mortgage rates. You remember those? All right? Mortgage rates at 11.3%, 84 to 86. You throw that in. By the way, housing's not expensive. It hasn't been expensive. In fact, it's just not. It's silly. And it even goes the next step. What's funny, the funniest thing about this, which no one even talks about, take a look at the house on the right. How much nicer is that house? You got a garage, you got a second floor. You don't have those horrible little cost centers on your front stoop. What are those things called? Oh yeah, kids. We're not going to have any of those in our generation, right? None of that nonsense. What are you talking about, right? No, I get it. Oh my God, everybody's wrapping their hands around how unaffordable housing is. You know what's funny is, yes, housing became unaffordable in the last year and a half because of rising interest rates. There's no doubt about it. But the decade before that, housing has never been more affordable. It's completely false. If you look at the cost of a house relative to incomes, accounting for interest rates, at post-Great Recession, right up to the pandemic, housing has never been cheaper in this nation. And I'm sorry if you missed your chance, Gen Z. You're out of luck, kids, all right? But you had your opportunity. It is now gone. But of course, affordability has faded. But that's because of interest rate policy, not some long-run trend against Gen Z. It's not what's going on. What's happening here, of course, is nothing more than the fact that the Federal Reserve, because of its violent policy choices, took mortgage rates of 5%, slammed them down to 2.5%, set off an insane bubble in housing, and then stomped on the brake by cranking them up to 7.5%. We have never seen mortgage rates go around so violently in such a short period of time, again, because of the chaotic efforts of the Federal Reserve itself. Look at some of these numbers. Phoenix, 62% increase in prices in 2 years. Tampa, 64. Vegas, 49. What's interesting is not until you get to San Diego. That's what I said. For the first time ever, it's not our bubble. It's everybody's bubble at this particular point in time. Of course, with interest rates coming up, suddenly the party's over, but the market has not broken down. But of course it hasn't. I already showed you the data. Tons of equity, clean debt, no big debt burden. This is bulletproof. Rising mortgage rates don't hurt that. The real issue, of course, is a lack of supply. And this, you can yet again lay at the feet of the miserablest narrative, right? The home builders are the ultimate manic depressives of the U.S. economy, right? They are. When things are good, it's great, build everything. And as a result of that, through every expansion, they build too much. Thus, when the recession hits, oh my God, I'm bankrupt again, right? Because that's how it works. Not this time. This last decade, we have seen some of the weakest pace of home construction ever in the history of the United States. Why? I have no explanation except for miserabilism. It's the only thing I can understand why we just haven't built enough. And the net result of that, look at housing vacancy rates. Record high level around the Great Recession. Right now, record low. Never have housing markets been tighter. And of course, it's interesting. You think about that impact of going from 2.5% to 7.5% mortgage rates. The real problem there is it means people aren't going to move. I mean, really, who's going to sell your house? Swap out your 2.5% for a 7.5%. Raise your hand. Let's do that question. Anyone? No? No? Well, what's wrong with you people? No excitement at all, right? Again, so the problem today in our housing market is not enough buyers, not enough sellers. In 2008, it was not enough buyers. The exact opposite. So this market is just simply, absolutely, totally shut down. And it's true here as well. You take a look at some of these recent dynamics. Active listings have absolutely collapsed. They were 1,400 pre-pandemic here in San Luis Obispo. Now they're 600. Meantime in the market, anything that does come up, immediately off. And as a result of that, you can see that the percent of homes selling above listing price is starting to rise. There are bidding wars even in a 7.5% mortgage rate market because there's so little there. And that's why we had this bizarre phenomenon with incredibly brief swing in home prices. They came down and they're coming back up. It's just nothing available. And it's supporting prices and it's going to keep housing unaffordable for a number of years. It's true here as well. Home prices in the area shot from a little over $600 to just below $900,000. And this is California Association of Realtors numbers, and there they sit. They haven't come down a bit. Yes, there are very few sales, but that's because no one's selling. It's an inventory effect, as simple as this. In the end, the market needs housing, which is why right now in the United States, new homes are the single largest share of home sales they've ever been, because it's the one part of the market we need new housing. They're building new housing, and a lot of people are buying their first home in a new house. That is where we are because of these bizarre circumstances. And this is why rents are so high and rental markets are so tight. Think of the entire generation of people who were about to get into home ownership, and then the door slammed on their face because of this rise in interest rates. And they're going to have to wait for everything to settle down, which is a number of years before they're going to maybe be able to make that jump, and that's going to keep those rental markets good. Now, that means home starts are still a very aggressive 1.5 million at the national level. The only thing I can say here, they haven't fallen. That's all you can say. 1,000 permits per year. Never saw the big increase over the last couple of years. And you can see how the decrease is having impact. Look at the big surge in units built in the 70s and 80s around here, and then all new stuff. There's nothing built after 2010 in San Luis Obispo. Housing supply has been turned off, as simple as this. And this is I want you all to stop and just focus on this. We just got the 22 data. This is from 2012 to 2022. This is change in housing units by unit and structure. This area in the decade has added 12,000 single-family homes and not one multifamily unit on net. Not one. Look at that number. That is your problem. Single-family is great and well and good, and you need more single-family. What you really need, and I'm going to tell you this over and over again, is apartments, 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 apartments. It's not single family. That is not where the issue is. Now we talked, who's ahead, who's behind. This is not a conversation about who has a good economy. It's about who has labor force. And California's problem has been a lack of labor force for a number of years. We used to add tons. You go back 30 years ago, and we got more labor force growth than the nation of all. Everybody slowed down, but California has slowed down more than most. And to be clear, right now, labor force growth over the last 5 years in California has been functionally zero. It's not just San Luis Obispo with that problem. You've been a decade. California's been 5 years, but it's the same thing. And what's scarier is, take a look on the right. This is net migration on a state-by-state basis. And yes, California is actually seeing population declines, not immigration. Population declines. So as bad as your labor force problems were, we now have, of course, a declining population base in the state of California. Why? Well, again, you've heard the narrative. What do we hear? People are fleeing. They're fleeing the state of California. They're fleeing high taxes, bad regulations. They are fleeing the horrible, horrible baseball teams that call California home. I wish Bob was here, right? We can commiserate, right? But honestly, let's talk about that for just 1 second. Just 1 second, right? Fleeing? If people were fleeing, what happens to housing vacancy? Goes up, right? By definition, right? You know, if you're fleeing a hurricane in Florida, housing gets vacant real quick. Well, guess what? That's not what's happening in California. Housing vacancy is the lowest it has ever been. What is going on? How does that work? How can we have people leaving and yet one of the tightest housing markets ever? Well, the answer is, here's a dirty little secret, turns out the number of households is going up. Aha, the plot thickens. So we don't have household declines, we have population declines. And that is where, again, the story takes us next. Look, this is Southern California. I'm going to come to San Luis Obispo in just a second. But what I'm showing you here is some data from the Department of Finance. And in particular, again, you can see population declines. LA has seen about a 4% decline in population over that 8-year period, but the number of households went up by 5%. The only way you balance that off, of course, is a spectacular decrease in people per household. In fact, people per household has gone down by 9% in Los Angeles, right? Now, what's going on? Exactly, What's going on? And understand, I want to talk about homelessness for just a second, all right? We all know it's a huge issue in California. And what's the story? What's the narrative? The narrative about homelessness is very clear because rents are going faster than renter income, because renters are on the edge, because these folks can't get ahead, right? And you know, they get one missed paycheck. That's it, they're homeless. This is why we need eviction moratoriums. We need, of course, rent control. We need affordable housing mandates because every renter you protect is one less potential homeless person. Here's the problem with that story. It's totally wrong. See, I already showed you the data. Actually, renters are seeing more income growth than homeowners. And let's understand what prosperity for renting folks means. What are the 3 worst things you can live with? All right, let's go through the order. Bed bugs, cockroaches, and anybody you're not related to, okay? So the first thing you want to do when you, of course, start getting a little better off is you want your own place. People are spreading out because of the prosperity, but when you live in a place with a limited housing stock, when this group of people who are doing well spread out, the people who are not doing as well end up getting squeezed in. And that is the problem. When people are doing better, then suddenly those people in the right tail who just don't have the skills, maybe they don't have a work permit, maybe they have an addiction problem, maybe they have a mental health problem, these folks get pushed out of the county, pushed out of the state, or pushed into the county, into the alley, and they become homeless. And yeah, it is a tragedy. But when you recognize it's because of the prosperity of the majority of renters, you realize you cannot fix this with eviction moratoriums. It makes the problem worse. You cannot fix this with rent control. It makes the problem worse. The only thing you can do to fix homelessness is build. We heard it before. Build, build, build. And take a look at the data here. Yes, population in San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara, which was already slowing tremendously, has dropped sharply. Just about 1% or so, but that's a big drop in 2 years. And yes, you see the same decline in people per household in San Luis Obispo you're seeing. In the last decade, there's been about a 5% decline in people per household, and that means for San Luis Obispo to keep up, they would need to build 5% more housing just to keep up with your current population base. Understand what you're dealing with here. And then when you start thinking about labor force, you then have to go to the next step in recognizing the competition between folks who want to retire here and folks who want to work here. Again, competing for that limited housing stock. It's supply, supply, supply. We need to stop talking about affordability. We need to talk about building more. And yes, there's some upsides. Take a look at this data. A huge surge in people with bachelor's degrees and grad degrees in this particular world. But it's pushing other people out. Or it's putting a lot of pressure on their families if they're trying to stay and be around their relatives or keep that job they have. You're creating a lot of pressures by not building, particularly apartments. You see it, of course, in the aging. Look how you're losing your 25 to 64-year-olds, but you see a big over 64. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with retirees. They're an enormous driver of economic growth and economic activity. Just look at Arizona and how they drive so much of the show there, right? It can be a great part, but you have to build housing for both the workforce and the folks who want to live here and enjoy this amazing place for their retirement years. You have to have enough for both of those folks. And if you choose not to build, then someone's going to get squeezed out. And who's going to get squeezed out, of course, is the low-skilled, low-income families. It's as simple as that. And it becomes problematic when you start recognizing that actually San Luis Obispo's economy is still tied heavily to tourism. I know there's other things happening. We heard some great things from Reach about some of the exciting things happening here, and there are potentials, and there is this underlying structure that can be accelerated and worked upon, but you can't do it because it's so damn nice to live here. You can't do it when every house is fought over by someone who wants to move here from San Francisco or LA to enjoy the retirement in this insanely beautiful place. You have to build or accept the fact that the limitations are going to lead to where the income is, and the income, of course, is with these older retirees. And you can see this apartment market. Look how much rents have come up in a decade, from $900 to $1,600, almost doubled. Yet, despite all this, vacancy rates are tight, and actually a whole number of renter-occupied units has fallen, of course, over the course of the last decade. Now, we wrote a report. I know some people have seen this. We did it on the Airbnb phenomenon, this kind of overnight stuff. There are a lot of people who are upset about that. But again, I want to go back to what I just said. Yet again, is Airbnb really the problem with lack of housing? No. It's just more type of demand for local housing, whether it's retirees or short-term visitors. These are folks who are taking advantage of this wonderful client, and you have to either, you could try to push them out and hurt your tourism economy, or you could try to build enough for everybody. Yet again, that is where, of course, everything lies. And when you think about affordability, take a look on the right-hand side. This is the share of households that are housing cost constrained. And actually, believe it or not, for all the increase in houses, this is from 2016 to 2022, the share of people who are housing cost constrained in the state is about 30%, and it's dropped just a little bit in that 6-year period. San Luis Obispo, 28% less, and it's dropped by more. And Santa Barbara, same thing, it's dropped by more. You're not seeing the affordability problems on the single-family side because the prices are reflecting the incomes of the people who want to buy these houses and live in this beautiful place. The problem, yet again, is on the rental side. So the single family, again, you can fight up the battles over the single family and who should be in them and what you should use them for. That's a perfectly reasonable internal political debate you can have. But putting all that to one side, please don't forget about multifamily. And there has been some numbers. You heard about a couple of those projects. But again, it's just starting now. It's a drop in the bucket. It's been a decade of no expansion in your multifamily housing stock. You need way, way more. And it would take so much pressure off to so many different parts of your economy. It would allow your tourism sector to grow because you have plenty of people to work in the wineries and to work in the restaurants. It would help your young folks who want to work with these tech companies because young folks don't buy homes, folks, particularly not in this market. They need apartments. It helps them too. Everything should be wrapped around multifamily, multifamily. I cannot say this enough. It needs to be the single largest area. Now, putting all that to one side, here's the scariest narrative, the inflation narrative. We already talked a little about the silliness of it, but where it really gets silly is when we start thinking about what people in D.C. are talking about when it comes to something like inflation. For example, Janet Yellen, as smart as she is, a chaired professor at Berkeley, friends with Milton Friedman back in the day, and yet she walks up to the microphone at the beginning of this thing and says, well, we didn't anticipate these supply chain issues. What? Supply chain issues don't cause inflation. You know that. Or we had Larry Summers, the esteemed economist, former president of Harvard, tell us, well, that was Biden's deficit. That was a terrible thing. We've been running deficit for decades. We've never had inflation. What are you talking about? Corporate greed, that's Liz Warren. I'm not even going to talk about this. It's so nonsensical. All right? Again, I showed you the data on gasoline. Or I like this one, Biden, not enough manufacturing jobs. I can't even make fun of that. It just doesn't make any sense at all, right? Or we got Mohammed Al-Arian, again, blaming the Fed for keeping interest rates too low for too long. Again, What are you talking about? From 2011 to 2019, interest rates were incredibly low, and we didn't have inflation. I can't believe that economists say this stuff out loud. I mean, politicians, okay, I get it. They're working the narratives, right? But economists? Hey, what else? Oh, man, it's probably the price of Swift's Taylor tickets, right? Or yet again, not that I'm bitter, it's probably the Dodgers' awful postseason pitching. Every time they flame out in the first round, they would get inflation, right? Clearly, that's the problem. Or how about this bizarre idea? It's inflation expectations, right? What's causing inflation? Inflation expectations. Ooh, it's like magical thinking. Woo! Right, man, inflation expectations. Who would say something like that? Oh, shit. Uh-oh. If the public expects inflation will remain low and stable over time, then absent major shocks, it likely will. He said, unfortunately, the same is true for high and volatile inflation. Not only can we wish high inflation, we can wish volatile inflation. Who knew? We're all so mad. You want inflation to go away? Come on, everybody work with me. What are we doing? It's a monetary phenomenon. Why do we have inflation, Jerome Powell? Because you caused it. Simple as that, right? Now, inflation is burning out of the system. I told you last year this was going to happen. It's going to cool off. Why? Because he produced X amount of new money. The economy and prices are catching up with it. Inflation is slowing down. It's only running about 3%. Honestly, not a big deal. The problem is past. But not for them, not for the Federal Reserve. Not for them. Let's go through the Federal Reserve's narrative, right? Let's work on it. First, number one, inflation was caused by some exogenous shock. Not us. We weren't here. Don't look at us. Some exogenous shock. That Putin guy, it's his fault, right? But now that it started, it's going to keep going. Why? Because inflation is caused by inflation expectations. Again, this is their words, okay? Third part, inflation is terrible for American households. Well, it's not their words, it's everybody's words. Just look at the paper. We hear it all the time. Clearly, this is an issue. Trust me, everybody on the Republican Party is going to be talking about nothing but inflation in the run-up to next November's election. That's how it's going to work, right? So if you add up, what do you get? Well, the Fed must fight inflation, and it doesn't matter if we lose some jobs or even cause a mild recession. After all, we have to lick it for once and for all. There he is, Jerome Powell. We've got to get inflation behind us. I wish there was a painless way to do it. There isn't. Can't you just see your father with a belt in his hand? Son, this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. No, it's not. Now, of course, we all got a big relief yesterday or day before, or whatever the hell it was. I have no idea what day it is. And that's because they didn't raise the federal funds rate yet again. And everybody, whoo, the stock market breathes a sigh of relief. What are we talking about? It's not the federal funds rate. This isn't the game. It's not the story. I told you this last year. The game is not the interest rate. We're not terribly interest rate dependent. I showed you all the data. Huge increase in interest rates, the economy is fine. This is not the issue. The issue is quantitative tightening. Now, quantitative easing, remember, is the process of printing money and buying bonds with it, quote-unquote buying bonds, and putting it on the Fed balance sheet. That's what I have on the right-hand side. It's the Fed balance sheet. We started the pandemic with about $4 trillion in assets. It shot up to about $9 trillion over 2 years, and now it's starting to decline. They're selling off those bonds. They sell them into the bond market with all the government bonds that the federal government's putting them in there, and they all clear at the same time. And, of course, the Fed gets the money back, and they destroy the money. They are shrinking the money supply through quantitative tightening. Why does this matter? Well, earlier this year, there was another little thing that happened. You remember there was a failure of a couple banks? Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic Bank went down. Remember those guys? And yet again, the narrative very quickly in the newspapers went to, oh, what are those bankers up to this time? Oh, what shenanigans are they pulling over on us, right? And I understand that. There's a little bit of a history, subprime, savings and loan. I get it, right? But, you know, ever since the Great Recession, the Federal Reserve has been much more aggressive in terms of monitoring banks. There's much higher capital ratios, a lot more controls in place. And clearly, they work because despite the failure of those two banks, actually, it's the cleanest banking system we've ever seen. Look at commercial loan performance. Delinquency rates, charge-off rates are lower than they have ever been. Lower than they ever been. This is not why Silicon Valley Bank went down. Why did they go down? The answer, of course, is the Federal Reserve. And to understand that, you have to understand the critical relationship between bank deposits and quantitative efforts. Look, The Federal Reserve printed up $5 trillion, gave it to Congress. Congress fire hosed it across the economy. Where did the money go? Well, I don't care who you gave it to. You gave it to a low-income person in a form of support. You gave it to a business owner from a PPP loan. You gave it to a local airport to support them through nobody flying. No matter what you do with it, it ends up in a bank. $5 trillion of quantitative easing turned into $5 trillion of brand new bank deposits. That is where they went. Now that they're doing quantitative tightening, they're similarly taking cash out of the banking system. And lo and behold, you can see deposits are falling, even as the money supply is falling, again, as a result of quantitative tightening. Why then did Silicon Valley Bank fail? Well, let's talk about that particular circumstance, okay? Stage one, step number one, A, okay? Their deposits went from $80 billion to $180 billion in the first year of this nonsense. $100 billion of brand new deposits. What do you do with it? You do exactly what the Federal Reserve tells you to do. You make loans, particularly safe loans, good loans, and then whatever you have left, you invest in assets. What kind of assets? Very specific. Treasuries, GSEs, super safe stuff. Right? Okay, we got that. That's the rules. That's what they did. In fact, how safe is all that stuff? Well, the only possible thing that can happen to debt assets like that is if, interest rates suddenly shoot up. Because that's what happens. In fact, if the 10-year bond rate goes from 1% to 5%, that is equivalent to a 45% decrease in the market price of a 10-year treasury. So think of all the 10-year treasuries that Silicon Valley Bank picked up as part of that investment surge, and then remember that the value of those assets went down by 40% because the Federal Reserve cranked up interest rates from 0 to 5%. Okay? That's step one. Now, guess what? That doesn't matter that much because banks don't have to mark to market. They don't have to do that. The only reason banks ever have to mark to market is if they should have to sell those assets into the open market. Now, why would you have to sell some of your assets? Typically, banks don't do that. Why would they have to? Well, just imagine after cranking up interest rates, the Federal Reserve suddenly engages in quantitative tightening, thus causing deposits to fall. There you go. That's the kicker right there. So Silicon Valley Bank, 80 to 180 billion, and then deposits started to go down with quantitative tightening, and they sat there and said, we have a problem. What are we going to do? We have two choices. We can go to the market for incredibly expensive external capital, and by the way, it's going to destroy our profits, or we can sell off assets at a loss and screw up our balance sheet. And while they were sitting there trying to figure out which was the least worst of those two options, there was a classic run and the bank failed. And that's more or less what happened to First Republic Bank. Same game completely. Why did we lose those two banks? It was the greatest sucker punch on the banking system ever perpetuated by the Federal Reserve. Now remember, what the Federal Reserve is supposed to do. Three things: price stability, full employment, and, of course, being the shepherd of the banking system. In a preposterous panic over full employment in 2020, they completely blew up price stability. And now in a preposterous, ridiculous, unnecessary panic over price stability, they are creating credit constraints within our economy. What is the single largest problem we have? The Federal Reserve itself. Our savior is our problem. And when I hear these guys say, Fed's bar calls Silicon Valley Bank a textbook case of mismanagement, well, I either have to cry or laugh. One or the other, right? Now look what's happening. Loan balances, they're not growing anymore. Suddenly, it's getting really hard to get a loan. I guarantee many of you in this room are going in the next 6 or 7 months to go out and find a banker and ask for a loan, and they're going to look you right in the eye, and they're going to say, no. Don't take it personally. It's not you. They know you'll pay it back. The problem is they don't have the money to give you. And you want to know why mortgage rates yet again are starting to surge? Well, again, quantitative tightening. And this is a weird thing. I haven't looked through all the minutes yet. All the news about the Federal Reserve, they say, Pat, nobody talked about quantitative tightening and whether they're going to continue the $90 billion a month, which is creating an absolute credit crisis. This is our big worry. So are we out of the woods? Is everything fine? Is everything hunky-dory? You know, do we survive? Here's what annoys me more than anything else. I know a lot of things annoy me, but this annoys me more than anything else. In 6 or 7 months, Jerome Powell is suddenly going to be heralded as this amazing Fed chairman chief who managed the soft landing. He stuck the soft landing. What a genius. There was no soft landing. There was no landing at all. We were never going to have a recession. We were never in the woods. That was always a preposterous conversation. And we still aren't going to have a recession because consumers are up to their eyeballs in wealth and money and potential credit and home equity. They're fine. But headwinds are going to be intensifying over the course of the next year. Inflation is going to be above target. Fed's going to continue quantitative tightening. And that, of course, means interest rates will continue to go up. My guess is interest rates continue to go up. You're going to start seeing some sagging yet again in asset prices. How far it goes, we really see. Will they actually capitulate this time? That could make it really scary. Don't think they will, but we've got to keep an eye on it. And yes, I think that as good as 2023 has been, 2024 is not going to be as good. It can't be. Parts of the economy outside of consumers are going to suffer from this credit situation. So our growth rate for next year, again, relatively positive, but take a look. You can see on the right-hand side, we're predicting a 10-year Treasury at 5.5% next year, peaking maybe above 6 before it comes back down. 30-year fixed-rate mortgage at 8.4, peaking above 9% before it starts coming back down towards the end of next year. So yeah, we got a whole other round to go through on this particular front with all sorts of secondary effects. But again, the consumer is going to be strong right through it. But the bigger issue, of course, yet again, is social narratives. And before I get into that final conversation about social narratives, you're going to be able to download a copy of the slides. Again, we had such great interviews. Kristen, by the way, who's up here in front, who's working with me on my talks, did all these interviews. You're going to see all this. This is a little SWOT analysis, and you can see a lot of the things we talked about. Not everything. I didn't have time for all of it. But go ahead, make sure you get a copy of this presentation. You don't have to take a picture of it, and I promise. Stop taking pictures of it. Stop taking pictures of it. Jeez, people. All right? And you know, I want to quote Paul here. The threats are the things that beyond our scope, but the weaknesses lead to opportunities. I think we have the strength to achieve. The biggest weakness here, over and over and over, multifamily. I'm a broken record. I'm sorry. You need multifamily. Battle all you want over single family. I get it. That's not your issue. You need apartments. All right? You need them. Lots of them. Make the change. Make it happen. Build. All right? And as for that narrative, you know, only thing I can say was they have a national case of Munchausen syndrome, right? Simple as that. Now, give me a second. I'm not, sit. Oh, okay. You're stressing me out, man. You're stressing me out. By the way, can we get a clap for him? He was great. Oh, my God. Unbelievable. Awesome. Awesome. But look, there's a whole other part to this, and this goes back to a little bit of the psychology of this whole thing. Look, there's a whole other conversation about narratives I think we have to appreciate. Another wonderful book, Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind, and in this book he talks a lot about these various moral nodes we have. He, along with Hari, both make another clear point, and they both recognize that the thing that makes humans really human is not, if you will, our language or our speech or ability to launch somebody in space, but it's our ability to cooperate. We have an unprecedented ability to cooperate. And there's a great quote in the Righteous Mind book where he says a primatologist once told him that as much as chimps are like us, there's one thing you'll never see two chimps do. You'll never see the two chimps bend down, pick up two ends of a log, and move it from point A to point B. Think of that. Two chimps cannot have a shared intentionality that will allow them to move a stick from point A to point B. They just don't. We do. That's why he says in this book, he says, humans are 90% primate, 10% bee. Why are we bees? How do we manage that? Well, that, of course, is narrative. See, bees are actually all related to each other. There's a genetic component. They're all sisters. But humans are. We're not related yet. Here we are. We're sitting at tables, and we're not killing each other. If there were this many cats here, it would be ugly. Trust me, okay? But we don't. Why? Well, again, it's our narratives. If you're in a rainforest, the tribe prays the same rain god. If you're all going to UCLA, Trojans suck, right? I mean, that's our common narratives. That is our bonding. And let me tell you something about why this is important. Because when these narratives become part of our social bonding, then trying to correct broken narratives becomes incredibly complicated. Because when you tell somebody their narrative is broken, you're not just telling them that your type 1 system is overdoing it. What you're really telling them is you're threatening the core of their social narrative, of their social structure. I've showed you many times over the last couple of years how income inequality has been falling in the United States, has been falling in California. It has been falling for 8 years now. This is great news, right? Yet, oddly enough, when I present this information to those on the left who are most concerned about income inequality, they get upset by it. And that is one of the most perverse responses that I've never been able to understand, but now I do. Yes, the news is good, but it's not just the news. This is the core of your politics, and I'm threatening that core. And that's why Jonathan Haidt says, if you want to get people to change their minds, you have to focus on indirective methods. And I agree with that. But there's another way of thinking about it, too. See, that's too passive. I want you all to recognize that you use the type 1 system way more than you think. I do, too. We all do. We all have to be aware of our cognitive biases. We all have to be aware of it, right? You know, there's another great expression by Mark Twain. It is easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled. This is an enormous issue. For example, did you know that Mark Twain never actually said that? True. True story. But he did now because it's in a meme. And you want to believe it because it's a great expression. Right? So listen, as always, go out, avoid the weapons of mass distraction. Build multi-family. Build it, build it, build it. And with that, thank you all so very much yet again.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. We are running a little short on time, so we're going to speed up our very scientific survey that we do every year, the red and green cards. Get those ready. I'm only going to ask one question. And while you do that, we're going to roll a video from one of our very important sponsors, from Amazon.
Hi, I'm Mary Wachowski, a Senior Product Manager at Amazon SLO, here at one of our 3 downtown offices. Amazon has been in San Luis Obispo for more than 18 years, currently employing over 150 Amazonians locally and partnering with Cal Poly to employ more than 50 students each year. Our local teams help independent authors reach audiences through Kindle Direct Publishing, help packages get to your door through our last mile transportation teams, and help businesses scale through Amazon Web Services. We love being a part of this incredible community and are proud to sponsor the Central Coast Economic Forecast to bring together business and community leaders and provide actionable data and analysis to our region. I hope you're enjoying the event, and now back to the forecast.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Amazon. Okay, real quick, but this is just too important to skip. Who is more talented? Green, if you think Taylor Swift is more talented. Red, if it's Travis Kelce for you. Let's see it. All right, the Greens take it. I mean, the concert's 3 hours long, for the love. All right, well, I'm excited to invite Judy Mahan back up to the stage. Judy, to present our big check to the winner of 3 Minutes to Win It. Let's hear it for Judy.
Thank you all for voting. Thank you for taking the time. And the winner is Nexstera Tech. Penny, come on up. The whole team.
The audience has spoken.
Thank you guys, all of you. Pardon my use of guys. Thank you all. We are so grateful to be here. This is an incredible opportunity. And I want to thank the CIE and Judy especially and my incredible team. It has been a pleasure. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you.
Amazing work, ladies. Thank you so much.
One more thing, Dr. Thornberg, that was incredible. The power of mindfulness, it's going to change the world, and that was the most beautiful presentation I've ever seen. So thank you.
And that's coming from someone from the Gen Z generation, which she may be alone in that sentiment. I have a lot of hate mail in the inbox. I am concerned about your security going out, so make sure you are well equipped. All right, folks, thanks so much for your attention. I hope you have enjoyed today as much as I have. We've got one more sponsor to thank. We're going to roll a video from KSBY.
This year, KSBY proudly celebrates 70 years in our community.
KSBY is focused on important issues and stories that impact the lives of our residents here on the Central Coast.
We are digging deeper to help viewers understand the forces that affect their lives and shape the local economy.
And we're highlighting the stories that bring hope.
KSBY is growing and evolving to reflect the changing needs of the community.
We have nearly doubled the number of KSBY reporters in the field, and they are concentrating on geographic beats to make more meaningful connections to the community.
KSBY is proud to continue our partnership with the Central Coast Economic Forecast.
All right. Dr. Thornberg, if you want to come back up. Thank you, KSBY. All right, so you all were very inquisitive today. I got a flood of questions. Many of them were the same question, actually. And so I'm going to kind of join a bunch of questions together. We're going to hit the high points today. I apologize if your question doesn't get answered. Let's start with housing. That was kind of the big point today. Yeah. Apartments, 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 I think is what I heard you say. Can we get a little bit more specific as you interviewed people in our community, and what would you say at the local level? What are strategies that could be employed to overcome some of the hurdles that prevent apartments from being built?
Well, first of all, you got to change the narrative, right? You got to get out there and you got to get people to recognize it's a supply issue more than an affordability issue. I mean, I appreciate that affordability is out of hand for a lot of folks, but that's because those homes are being purchased by people who can afford them. You understand? And the way to deal with that is to make sure you have enough supply for everybody. That's what it really boils down to. And you know, the thing about that is there's a concept in economics called filtering. And the way to think about it is very simple. Is if you build at the top to supply at the bottom. Very often people get really antsy. Oh, no, you can't build a big fancy house or a big fancy apartment building because we need affordable housing. But it doesn't work that way. You build at the top, and by building at the top, you actually create space at the bottom. And if you understand filtering, let me explain it to you the other way. If you don't build at the top, you have gentrification. And very much what you're seeing is that form of gentrification because housing supply is not keeping up with demand. So again, build and build anything. Now, with that being said, from a business standpoint, a local standpoint, it is, of course, boils down to the multifamily phenomenon. Now, there's a whole other question there. Most multifamilies in this room, builders would tell you that's all well and good, but with interest rates going up, it's becoming very expensive for me to build an apartment building. And how do we get across that? And that is true, but then the bigger burden on apartment buildings is actually fees. Permit fees, all sorts of connection fees, all sorts of these infrastructure costs, the years of litigating and fighting with every single planning board. These are the real costs. And if the local community gets behind the effort of building more multifamily, the argument is now more than ever, this is the time to get in front of that stuff. Say, look, for the next couple of years, we're going to do it differently. We're going to have density bonuses. We're going to make certain parts of our region available for multifamily development, and we're going to put special kind of bonuses, special kind of revisions that encourage people to do it even in a high interest rate environment. If I may suggest, a great plan for this, City of Santa Rosa a few years ago lost a tremendous amount of their housing stock because of a horrendous fire. In the middle of that, it was one of the brief periods of time where NIMBYs had to sit down. Who's going to argue about new housing when you just lost a huge share of your low housing stock? And then they put in a plan to completely rebuild downtown Santa Rosa. Now, it's taken them a long time to get it going. It's longer because it's hard sometimes to get things to happen. But it's happening now. All of a sudden, you're seeing more multifamily going up in downtown Santa Rosa, and it is creating a whole new potential for that particular city. You can do that here, too. But you have to be out there. You have to be vocal. You know, I said this before. The political world operates on the basis of narratives, and the narratives they're reacting to are the narratives of the people in front of them who go to those meetings. If you are not part of the solution here, you end up being part of the problem. Your voice has to be heard too. Please get involved. Please get involved. Be the YIMBY. Be out there. Fight for things to change. Get things to be done for your students, for your workers, for the community to be able to grow. Go out there and be involved. And if you can't directly be there, support the folks who do. Support the chambers, the development organizations who can be there and be their voice for you. You have to get involved. This is up to you. You have to do it.
Well said. Well said. You spoke a lot about kind of the income gap not being quite so big as the narrative makes it out to be. But can you talk about the wealth gap? So we did see a lot of wealth created. Was that spread out equally?
Well, I actually showed you data on that, net worth by period of time. And yes, the bottom 50% saw, on a proportionate basis, more increase in their net worth over the last 5, 6, 7 years than the top 50% did. No doubt about it. That being said, wealth inequality is still way too large in our nation, as the case may be. Like, I point out the income inequality is falling, wealth inequality is falling, but none of that means that our efforts to continue to help those less fortunate than us shouldn't continue to be in place, right? And there's lots of things you could do. In fact, you know, and just from a labor force expansion standpoint, we've talked about this in the past, but I think it's worth bringing up yet again. You already have a potential labor pool here right under your noses that you're not utilizing, and that, of course, is women. Women in the United States have one of the lowest participation rates of any developed country. And the reason for that, of course, is that this is the one country that singularly does not subsidize child care. Now, thank you. The point of this, of course, is very simple, that if the community involves itself in this particular issue, helps subsidize and building, you not only free up more women to go out and continue and maintain their careers, they are there to be part of your workforce and to continue to help grow this economy. And by the way, it's good for the family and it's good for the kid, all these efforts as well. Pre-K is the same sort of thing. It's such an obvious investment, yet for some reason it always ends up on the bottom of the totem pole. Why? That's the narrative we need to be talking about. That's a solution for all sorts of problems. So that's where you really need to lean in, and you could do things even faster than the housing conversation could.
I love it. All right. I'm going to get in 2 more questions. Bear with me here. One of the things that a bunch of people are asking about that I'm sorry if I missed it, but is the commercial office situation. You got a lot of vacancies.
Yeah, I didn't have time to go into that.
A lot of debt coming to roll over.
Yeah, I know.
What's your expectation
Yet again,
there?
it's so funny because I did a couple. There was ULI was in L.A. yesterday. It's a huge like real estate kind of fraternity sorority kind of thing. And I had a bunch of conversations with them. And again, it's so funny because the narrative in office is, at the end is nigh, right? Yet, if you actually look at the data, you'll find that smaller markets haven't seen increases in vacancy rate. We do have vacancy rate data for here. Office vacancies haven't changed in so ways, but they're fine. In fact, in some smaller markets, they're actually falling. Smaller markets that build housing. That's what the thing capping offices here. Now, yes, the Bay Area has a big problem. LA has a big problem. But there's 2 things. Let's just take the Bay Area just for a second. Bay Area has a big office problem on their hand. They have too much of it. I get that. But there's 2 things. First of all, some of that has to do with the fact that San Jose expanded its office stock by 50% in the last decade. They expanded the labor force by 5%. They expanded their office space by 50%. Who let that happen, right? What were you thinking, right? That's the first problem. And the second thing to keep in mind is the unemployment rate in San Francisco and San Jose is 3%. They don't have an economic problem. They have an excessive amount of office space, right? They have to figure out what to do with it. Do it. Stop pretending it's a big crisis. Figure out what buildings you want on red tag. Tear the damn things down and put up apartments. It's not complicated. But it's not that big of a deal either. Now, what's the funny thing is the other side of that. Because industrial, of course, is the golden child that no one talks about, right? And rents are way up and vacancy rates are down. Well, there's a problem there, too. Because the big commodity markets, Phoenix, the Inland Empire, violently overbuilding. We've hit the point, and now you're going to have too much supply. Now, not here. The Central Coast hasn't been building enough industrial. The small industrial markets will be just fine. But the big commodity ones are in for a big hit in the face in the next couple of years. They're going to wake up. And even Prologis, for example, the CEO of Prologis going around going, well, we may have overdone it just a little. Yeah, you think so? Millions of square feet in years. It just didn't make any sense. So, again, it isn't what you think. And ultimately, none of this matters for the broader economy because what drives the economy is the consumer. This is all just REITs fighting with each other, right? Like in a lot of cases, the equity level is negative. Okay, the banking system's fine. The credit system, the biggest problem with the credit system is the Federal Reserve. But what you have is you got a bunch of rich people who are going to figure out who gets the haircut and who gets the building. Simple as that. So don't let it get into your head. It's not part of the economic picture.
Okay. All right. Final question, probably the most hard-hitting. Sorry to hit you with this.
No, I'm married. I'm sorry.
It says, it's actually from a gentleman by the name of Bob Wacker. If the Dodgers spend even more money on pitchers that can make it through a season without getting suspended for bad behavior, Do you think the level of fan miserableism will subside? Or, to focus on data rather than feelings, will they actually be able to win a playoff game?
Let Bob know that I'm too busy watching the Rams implode to spend time worrying about the Dodgers at this particular point in time. So we'll see. We'll see. Maybe
We'll have a
next year.
sense. Excellent.
Thank you
Let's hear
very
it for
much,
Chris
everybody.
Thornberg. Well, that is our program. I'm excited already to see y'all next year. Thank you so much for your attention and engagement. Have a wonderful day. Be safe.